You've built a business called Binary Tree. You grew that to 200 people across 12 countries. And then you did deals with IBM and Microsoft and then sold it all to a $4 billion company. But that's not actually what I want to talk about today. When you start working with a new client, what do you think about? What's your frame?
By new client, I mean, I'm working with organizations that are typically mature, over 10 years in business, over $10 million in annual revenue. We really start with the end in mind. What does the founder want out of a transaction that is going to ultimately occur? How much money do they need? Everybody wants their company to be worth $1 billion. It's a lot less dramatic if the conversations are based on data. I'm a big fan of having KPIs and metrics and measurements in place for the entire executive team.
Welcome to the CEO and the Salesman podcast, where we talk to real operators what it takes to grow real businesses in the real world. My guest today is Pivnik, a seasoned entrepreneur and an author, a speaker, an overall good guy. He and I have been chatting and cutting into our time of recording today. So g'day, Stephen. How are you going?
Hey, Matthew, I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Mate, my pleasure. So, look, your resume is outrageous. You know, you've built a business called Binary Tree. You grew that to 200 people across 12 countries, and then you did deals with IBM and Microsoft, and then sold it all to a $4 billion company. So, but that's not actually what I want to talk about today. That's not the headline that I want to get into. I just want to give everybody a chance to understand who Stephen is, who's listening to this. What I really wanted to talk about is the problems that most founders have, the decisions that they avoid, the conversations that go unhad in those boardrooms that actually stop a person from reaching the goals that you've achieved in your life and your customers and how you grind through. So, mate, I want to talk to you about that. So, of all the businesses you now work with, you've been across multiple countries. What was the decision process you go through? Where do you start when you start working with a new client, and what do you think about? What's your frame?
Yeah, with new clients specifically, and just to put my answer into context, by new client, I mean, I'm working with organizations that are typically mature, over 10 years in business, over $10 million in annual revenue, closer to 50 usually. And I'm working with founders that are looking to march towards an exit for themselves and for the company, specifically founders that have never done that before. So that puts it into my answer into context. The answer to the question is, we really start with the end in mind, right? And by the end, I mean, what does the founder want out of a transaction that is going to ultimately occur? How much money do they need in their pocket in order for it to be the exit to be successful for them and for other stakeholders? Everybody wants their company to be worth $1 billion, right?
Yeah, of course.
Less than 1% of the companies end up being worth $1 billion. So there's an exercise that I go through to figure out what that magic number is for that founder specifically. And then we work backwards to figure out what does the enterprise value at transaction time need to be for the founder to walk away with what he or she wants. And then we basically put together a 12 to sometimes 36-month roadmap in order to get to that enterprise value.
Got it. So we've got an end in mind. We know where we want to go to. Then tactically, is it different for every client that you work with, or is it a framework that you go through to help you and the client have a meeting of the minds there?
The framework is almost identical. Every client will fill in different, to put it in simple terms, different rows on the spreadsheet, right? There's enterprise value. How much is this company going to be sold for, assuming it's an all cash deal? And if it's not an all cash deal, then there's permutations of what that top line is. Then who's going to get money from those proceeds? The shareholders, the stock option holders, the lawyers, the accountants, debt holders, senior debt, mezzanine debt. The list goes on and on and on. Some founders, unfortunately, fill in every single line. And there's others that are more fortunate. They may not have any other shareholders. They may not have any debt. They may have a tiny amount of, stock option holders, things like that. So the framework is the same, but then we get into the nitty-gritty details of the individual proceeds. And then if we're doing this properly, years before the actual exit, we do a lot of tax planning with tax planning professionals to minimize that big chunk that our favorite relative, Uncle Sam, gets.
Yeah, got it. So I can imagine that it wouldn't just be a mechanical set of issues that the founder has, but also a set of psychological issues that they. Not saying these are people who are broken or any have problems, but I'm talking about people who go, well, I want to achieve this, but they've probably got to take a few mental leaps from where they are today to where they want to be. How do you navigate those types of conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question because there are a lot of mental leaps. A lot of founders, especially those that have been running their company for a very long time, like I did, that's part of their identity. That
Mm.
they are nothing, without that company because like in my specific case, it was my first child. My company was born before our first daughter was. So I literally refer to it as my first child, and it was. As the years went on, and I ran my company for over 20 years, I I would say for the first 20 years, my identity was completely surrounded by my company. I was binary tree, right? And then I had to mentally, turn that switch off to say, in order for the exit to be less emotional on me, I need to slowly but surely start separating my identity from my company. And I can go through a laundry list of ways that I actually did that. But that's really key for people to do significantly ahead of the actual transaction date, because otherwise it can be pretty traumatizing that you're running a million miles an hour, transaction closes, and your company's in somebody else's hands.
Here you are. And so, what were some of the big decisions that helped you bridge that gap? I mean, obviously, getting to the number of people you had in the number of countries that you had, and then doing those deals with those giant organizations. What were some of the key markers along the way where you had to change your mindset about certain things?
Yeah, there was a lot of things I needed to change, and a lot of founders have to deal with this. I don't like the term, but they're called sacred cows, right? So
Yeah.
these are individuals that have started with founders from the very, very beginning, and they become incredibly close friends. There's a lot of loyalty because that's given to the individual because of all the blood, sweat, and tears that have been put in early on. But as the company matured and progressed, on the sales front, those individuals all of a sudden, find themselves swimming in waters that they've never swam in before. So a person that was great at sales, at bringing the company from zero to, let's say, $5 million, really doesn't understand the dynamics that are necessary between 5 to 10 million and above. And there's a whole bunch of other examples in various different roles. So one of the many mindset shifts is, in order for the transaction to not be penalized, because there will be it will be held against you if you have these sacred cows within the organization, because that it surfaces up really, really quickly during due diligence.
Can you think of a time when you had to have that hard conversation? Can you take us through that I guess the circumstance? No names and no court martials, of course, but
Sure.
just take, because what I want to do is take it from the idea of we've got to deal with these issues, but how do the listeners who are maybe in that situation, how do they start that conversation? How do they frame that for the individual who either we can pull them along or find a different seat for them?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to have the conversation, and it's a lot less dramatic if the conversations are based on data, right? So I'm a big fan of having KPIs and metrics and measurements in place for the entire executive team, right? So if you have somebody, sales is very easy to pick on because it's very, very objective, right? There's a number
Yep.
to be met, and it's binary, pun intended. It's you either meet that number or you didn't.
Yep.
So if you measure it religiously on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis, it's real easy to have a conversation with your head of sales saying, it's been 6 quarters now. We jointly came up with this plan to make these milestones in our numbers, and they're not being hit. For the sake of the company, we need to find somebody who's better equipped to make these numbers on a go forward basis. So if the conversations are much more objective, based on numbers versus I don't think you're cutting it. This isn't a fit for you anymore. This may not be the best place to work. Those are hard and emotional and sad and are unproductive versus the objective one around numbers.
Yeah, got it, got it. And so, with your business, so let me just take me back to the beginning of Binary Tree. So, what was the motivation that had you start that organization?
Yeah, interesting. The motivation was nothing. actually evolved over time. But to answer your question specifically, the motivation was I was an independent consultant. I was a programmer, and I was working for various consulting agencies that placed me on various projects. And I was doing my work. They made a margin on my bill rate, and after a couple of years of doing that, I realized that they're making margin off of my back, off of my hard work that I'm putting in, and they're not adding any value whatsoever. Granted, I greatly appreciated that they got me the gig and they got me the job, but they never showed up. They had nothing to do with the project. They rarely maintained a relationship with the actual customer or the project manager that was in charge of the project and me. So I said to myself, you know what? I can do if I started a company with some of my friends, some of my peers that I was working with together, and we actually approach these projects as a company versus just an individual. And we actually did do customer relationship management. We did care about the project. We would keep in touch with all of the consultants working. We would have relationships with the actual stakeholders at the customer site. We would probably make a really, really good run at it. And we did. So we initially started a company as a application development organization, building custom applications for large companies in New York City.
That's cool. And so this is the thing that I think a lot of, if a technical person is listening, what Stephen is just talking about there is not necessarily having a greater level of capability, because whether he was contracting or delivering it as a business, it was the same person delivering it. The difference there was the relationship that you could actually create and build. And this is the thing that I talk a lot about on the podcast and a lot of my clients, Stephen, is that the bridge is often, so the bridge to go from where you are to where you want to be is that relationship conversation. We were just off air, we were talking about, so I'm now living in Princeton. Stephen used to live here as well. And we were talking about a club that he mentioned that I should join. I said, "Don't worry, I've already joined it." And we both know the same person. We both have good feelings about this person. And of course, if opportunities in the future come up, this person is also going to have, they're going to be at the table. So it's the relationship stuff. It's the offline, and so many people are so enamored by what AI's capability is. I think they really are missing that human piece, and what you were just saying there is really interesting. And the point I'm pushing on the point a little bit hard here is that the capability didn't necessarily change. It was the delivery and the relationship that changed, and that gave you the ability to grow a really successful business, right?
Yeah, that's spot on. I mean, you nailed it on the head. And it's the IT organization that you were part of, which was pretty sizable as well. I'm assuming you had a similar approach from a customer relationship management perspective.
Oh, absolutely. It was, that was the one thing that made a very big difference to my first startup, is that we had a very strong customer service function. We even instigated we called it the Grand Tour, to go around, and nothing to do with it. It would have been more fun if we did it in cars. But we would actually go to every single city in Australia and New Zealand and Hong Kong where we had clients, and we would do a 1 or 2 day Ask Me Anything training session, and we could have delivered it, and we were delivering it all online. We're delivering it all video, online, audio, workbooks, all that sort of stuff. But we would do these meetings in small boardrooms in every city in Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, just to have that personalized touch. And what happened is that really baked on the client experience. It baked on their levels and I guess feelings of oneness. And whenever things were a bit challenging, and in every business there are challenges with product or whatever,
Of course.
those people were no longer, it wasn't adversarial. It was often, how do we fix this? How do we move? They're sitting on the same side as the table looking at the issue, not Matthew, fix it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, good on you for, going above and beyond to actually have those meetings, because the relationships that are built or just enhanced is priceless.
And I'm finding myself with I've moved to the US to start a new division of my business 6-7 months ago, and the new leaf that I've turned over, and it's not really a new leaf, but I was living on the Gold Coast, and I had convinced myself that it was, I could sit here, look at the ocean, chill, and just do everything online. Well, you know what? I've moved to America, and the couple of clients that I've started in the last couple of months and generated long-term contracts with, I've gone and met them in New York. I've gone and met them here in Princeton. We've sat down. We've had coffee. It's a face-to-face, and which is crazy when you think, oh, this is a remote world. this is a world in which we can do everything online, and we can do everything online. It's just less effective.
100%. I'm all for the face-to-face, and I've actually started inviting people here into my podcast studio so that I can actually meet with podcast guests on face-to-face, because I find that this is great. Don't get me wrong, but the conversation is just, it's that much, warmer and a little bit more personal when you're sitting at the same table.
Yeah, absolutely. And so anybody listening, just have a think about what is the extra thing you could do with a client, extra little bit of way you could recognize them. I saw Stephen Bartlett on his podcast, being Diary of a CEO. They did a little scrapbook for Jimmy Fallon. I saw that being promoted somewhere in the last couple of days.
Yeah, I saw that.
And when he's on that show, it's not about his business, which is, of course, a very impressive business. It's not about his empire. It's not about his podcast. It's about the scrapbook that he bought him, that he gave him with his own photos in it. And so these are the things that we need to find opportunities to just do something different. If, and often, in marketing terms, I continue to try to convince customers to do direct mail. Literally post things out, little stress balls or magnifying glasses or little things that sits on the desk, because it's unusual, because everybody's emailing. Nobody's sending actual things anymore. So let's do something different. When, 25 years ago when email was invented, send emails. It was interesting. Ding, you've got mail. Oh, goody. Now you've got mail is like, oh shit, really?
Exactly. No, the feeling somebody gets when they receive an actual physical package with something inside, and that just signals that, hey, somebody thought enough about me to put a package together, even if it's a stock item. It could be a bottle of wine, which they probably have 16 of in their office, and they send this out to all their new clients. Doesn't matter. That gesture alone is still so unique these days that it just goes a long way, and it sends a really, really good message. So I started doing that with guests as well. So I have my brand color is orange. Most of the things that I have is orange. So I have an orange box. I fill it with blue confetti, and I put in my book, my planner, my pen, and a handwritten note inside the box, and they get it. And the reaction has been spectacular.
Well, you've set the standard now. I'll have to just make a note here, send Stephen gift. So just sort of back to business. And so if you're thinking about your existing customers you're working with and businesses you're advising, what are the 2 or 3 things that you got to make sure those CEOs, those board members are thinking about on a really regular basis? What are the touch points that you want to focus on and help them continue to measure their success and march towards that exit? Because in your book you've got built to exit. Built to finish. You talk about that, but I want to make sure that we're really nailing gives our listeners something to take away. They go, okay, I got to think about that tomorrow when I go into my meeting.
Sure. So 3 top things come to mind. The first one is recurring revenue, right? You need to make sure that you have the majority of your revenue is recurring revenue as much as possible. In my specific case, unfortunately, I did not have a lot of recurring revenue. Even though I grew my business to a substantial amount of revenue, very little of it was recurring. And as a result, I got dinged on my company valuation upon exit. Not complaining, but it's a huge, huge driver of valuation, or could be a valuation killer. The second one is corporate governance, and having the discipline to have your finance and accounting functions close your books religiously and accurately. This comes out really, really quickly when you start being courted by acquirers, or if you start going through a standard marketing process with an investment banking firm, because the courting process and the due diligence process will last months, sometimes 3 to 6 or more months, and the acquirer. The last thing you want to show an acquirer is that you can't close your books quickly after the month end, like within a week, and accurately, right? Because their perception of you will either sink or go through the roof, depending on how well you perform in giving them numbers, which they will continuously ask for, during the courting and due diligence process. The third is really operationalizing your business so that you personally, the owner, and executive leaders within your company don't represent a risk to the buyer. Meaning, if the transaction closes, and 1, 2, or many of you leave, will the business still function? So they're analyzing this on their own. They're already, for every single person you bring to the table during due diligence, they're saying to themselves, well, do we have somebody that's going to execute on that role if the person that's currently there all of a sudden decides to leave? So you want to make sure that your business is as operationalized as possible, so that it represents less risk to the acquirer.
How does one balance the interplay of operationalizing, creating standard operating procedures around everything, and the magic and mojo that it takes to get there? Yeah, because there's always going to be some magic and mojo that exists in a business. Because if it was all just procedures, and AI could spin up every business, and that'd be the end of all businesses.
True.
So there's got and there'd be a lot more technical founders who are billionaires than that are out there. But there's a lot of businesses out there that are built on these relationships, which we've already spoken about. So how do you bridge that gap between that magic and the procedure?
Yeah, easier said than done, right? If it was easy, everybody would do it. It needs to be embedded as part of the culture of the organization, and it starts at the top, right? So the leader needs to show the team that they're documenting and operationalizing as much as possible, and they need to expect the same from their staff, right? So if the leader's doing it, and they can lead the executive staff into doing things similar, then it just trickles down, and it almost becomes standard operating procedure to document your operating procedures. And we're not saying that you have to dot every single I and cross every single T. I mean, that's completely overboard. That's not necessary. But when you present something like standard operating procedures, even at a high level during due diligence to the acquirer, again, raises perception tremendously, versus not having anything. Then that represents risk and a valuation ding.
Got it. And was that something that you focused on with binary tree? Was that something that you was in your front of your mind at the beginning, or is it something you learned over time?
Definitely learned over time, based on really good advice that I received. And this is a perfect area. There's many other areas where I actually did what I say, but this specific one is an example of do as I say, not as I do, because I'll be the first to admit that we were not as well documented as we could have been. And what saved us was that we sold the company to our number one competitor, who didn't care. Their number one objective was to take us out of business, right? Had the deal gone in a different direction to one of the private equity firms that was also bidding, there would have been some issues around the lack of systemization around our procedures.
So just talk to me a little bit about that. So was there a valuation differential between a competitor taking you out and a PE firm? Did they present different numbers?
So when we went to market, meaning we hired an investment banking firm to sell the company. So we refer to that as going to market with the company, which is different from going to market with a product. You're going to market, and the product is your company. That's investment banking speak. We initially had interest from a couple of strategics, one being our competitor, and two private equity firms. We didn't actually get to the level of valuation with the private equity firms, because they dropped out of the race pretty quickly because of my first point, the lack of recurring revenue. Even though we had a 26-year track record of growing year after year after year, we didn't have contractual recurring revenue. I knew that we would make more money every single year than the previous year, because we did it continuously. But a private equity firm, wants a little bit more security and guarantees that revenue is going to be coming in. So they dropped out pretty quickly, while the strategic acquirer, which was our biggest competitor and a $4 billion company, they completely understood the nature of our business, and they understood that we can continuously grow even without having that recurring revenue.
So if you think about a consulting business, how would you build? So if you were to wave a magic wand to go back in time and then say, okay, well, I'm going to build recurring revenue, how would you do that in a consulting business?
Yeah, in a consulting business, it's really tough. I mean, you can definitely build long-term contracts and relationships, with customers where you can become their outsource, fill in the blank, their outsource,
Yep.
AI developer, their outsource, PHP developer, things like that. So you can build in, long-term relationships and long-term, contracts with your customers, and that would be recurring revenue. Or what the route that we went is we actually built a software product. And I would love to say that, we had this vision of building a software product because we wanted to pivot into the software business. We were at the right place at the right time. I don't want to take any credit away from us. We did an incredible job with that opportunity, but a customer hired us to develop a custom project for them. And then a light bulb went off. We said, we can turn that little custom project into a product. And we turned it into a suite of products over time. And we slowly morphed into much more of a software company versus a professional services application development shop.
Got it. Okay. And so did you spin up new divisions for that, or did you continue to have your existing resources and structure operate with the product and also the services?
It was a new division. It was same company. There would have been a pretty good argument to be made to actually spin up a new company, because in hindsight, I probably would have spun up a new company to do this. So it would be a pure play software company versus what we ended up becoming as a hybrid software company and professional services company, because we always had services. We didn't do any more of this custom work that we did when we first launched, but we did a lot of professional services around the products that we sold.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So just sort of switching gears to thinking about CEOs, that they often position themselves as the person with all the answers. How does a CEO go and position themselves so they can sell without them being the linchpin of the organization? How do they think about that process of linchpinning themselves, but also still continue to hold their reputation through the sale?
That's a great question. This is one of my favorite topics. And this is one that I did think about extensively, and it took me a while to implement it. When I was selling my company, or when I made the decision that I wanted to sell my company soon, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't part of the deal. So in order to ensure that I wasn't part of the deal, or that the acquirer wouldn't think that there's any sort of risk or contingency on me being there, I made the decision to replace myself as CEO. So I promoted myself to executive chairman. But prior to that, before bringing in a CEO, which is a very, very scary move for a lot of founders, especially the ones that have been running their company for a long time, because it's very, very risky to give over the keys to the kingdom over to somebody else for them to run it. So what I did was sorry, let me redo that. What I did was I found a perfect candidate. And him and I knew that he was eventually going to be CEO if he did well as COO, reporting to me. So I gave myself a year in order to build that trust and to validate my decision. And he started to function as a COO, which is really second in command in most organizations. And it didn't take a year. It took me 3 months to validate the decision that I made to potentially make him CEO, and surprised him with a much quicker than he expected promotion to CEO. And I promoted myself to executive chairman, started focusing on a whole bunch of other hobbies in the endurance world, which kept me super, super busy. But I had enough time to, keep tabs on everything, because it was still my baby. I never micromanaged him. I never overruled any decisions, and he made some serious decisions, which he ran by me, of course. But I made sure that, he had the autonomy and the authority to execute the way a CEO needs to.
What were some of the blind spots that he identified that he could do a better job of running the business than you could?
Yeah, great question. He was just unencumbered by a lot of the history and the drama.
25 years, right?
And the relationships that I had with folks. So I had a lot, not that I had sacred cows per se, but I would let a lot of things go, right? It's only human to let things go from people that have been working with you for so long. And he was a no BS type of guy. So if somebody said, hey, I'm going to deliver XYZ on this date, you better deliver XYZ on that date. Otherwise, there would be a price to pay. Right. So
Mm.
people, got used to that really, really quickly.
Right. Okay. So the blind spots were around your relationships with your existing team, and in the past they might remember Stephen from 15 years ago and still think it's that person that we're dealing with, not the Stephen of today or of 25 to 10, 15 years later, where the business has continued to scale, your education has scaled, you've grown, and those people haven't recognized that incremental growth of you.
Yeah, exactly. And there was other things, right? Founders are very, very guilty of bright, shiny objects and side projects. So just like everybody else, I had, one or two of those going on, and he was able to open my eyes, from a cash flow and from a margin perspective. It's like, Stephen, why are we doing this? I'm like, because it's great. This is fantastic. It has this much potential. Okay. Let me show you the last 24 months worth of financials on this project. And it was a hard truth that I didn't want to hear, but I accepted it because, again, it was an objective conversation based on numbers versus, Stephen, this is silly to do. We shouldn't be doing this anymore. So back to my numbers philosophy. It's important.
That's fantastic. I built a number of software project ideas that we eventually started calling the maximum unviable product. So it was, and it never got sold. We burned up hundreds of thousands of dollars and never put it in the marketplace. The market had moved on. Anyway, it's not about me today. So
actually, you're ahead of the game. If it was only hundreds of, I mean, I've blown millions on pet projects, which it's really, really sad. I'm not proud of it, but there were super expensive lessons learned. And now I actually have this pattern recognition. So when I'm speaking with clients, I can actually bring their attention to some of their pet projects and help them avoid it getting any deeper or any costlier.
Yeah, I like that. I saw an interview with an entrepreneur, and they were talking about how they can come up with 100 ideas, and their 2IC came along and said, well, look, if you think about this as a manufacturing process, the ideas need time to go through the machinery to create value. And so the problem is with people like probably both of us, they go, well, we've got lots of ideas. Let's stick them in the front of the machine and the value creation machine. And then once that's on the conveyor belt, we'll go build something else. Or we haven't given it enough oxygen to actually create and deliver value. And so that is something that I think about a lot. I think about it. I read a book called The Goal, and it was a narrative story about how just-in-time manufacturing, which doesn't sound like a very interesting book, but it did introduce me to the manufacturing process. And then when I applied those ideas to software development, when I applied those ideas to business development, they're the same problems. So you've got roadblocks, you've got all these steps along the path, and if you try to put too much through the machine, it's going to break, and it's not going to actually produce value at the end of the day.
Agreed. So I mean, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, so I can entirely recommend The Goal and a follow-up book called The Phoenix Project, which is the goal is the manufacturing version, and the Phoenix Project is the IT version. Same narrative structure of those two books.
Okay.
Anyway, so just want to talk to me a little bit about the feeling. Okay, so you've sold the business. Your identity is reasonably wrapped up in this organization you've been running for 20-something years. What's that first couple of weeks look like after you've sold it?
Yeah, it was really, really interesting because definitely, unfortunately, I was wrapped up with a lot of health issues, not personally, with my father-in-law and my mother. Literally, like 5 days after the close, both of them ended up in the hospital in bad shape.
Oh.
And my mother made it out, but my father-in-law never did.
Oh, wow. Sorry.
So there was, it kept me really, really busy. And you know what? I like to say, everything happens for a reason. And maybe the transaction happened, when it happened, because my time was needed to care for others. Mm-hmm. And I was able to give, 24/7 attention to my wife and, her side of the family, and actually, split that 24/7 between my father-in-law and my mother. And so when that settled, and then the realization hit me that I no longer have a company, because I had been planning for this for over 3 years at the time, and because I had other hobbies, that I was able to, focus on. And so, when that settled, and then the realization hit me that I no longer have a company, because I had been planning for this for over 3 years at the time, and because I had other hobbies, that I was able to, focus on. And so, when that settled, and then the realization hit me that I no longer have a company, because I had been planning for this for over 3 years at the time, and because I had other hobbies, that were really going to take up a lot of my time, specifically endurance events. I became addicted to triathlons and mountaineering and ultra marathons. That started taking up so much of my time that I just felt really, really grateful that I was able to, spend many hours, weeks, months, doing those types of things before I got bored and then got into advisory work so that I can live vicariously through other entrepreneurs.
So, what's the relationship between your fitness journey and not just fitness? You're not doing CrossFit. You're actually doing incredible races. You're going out there triathlons, and this is something that takes pretty seriously. So, what have you seen the relationship between that activity and running a business? Is there any?
There's so many. My entire book is based on I take readers through two journeys, like my entrepreneurial journey and my endurance sports journey, and I compare and contrast both. Just to name a few, on planning, preparation, execution, pivots, setbacks, leadership, decisions, danger at some point, right? That there's so many parallels. I found that when I got hit by this endurance bug at the age of 40, that I became a bit better businessman, primarily because of measurements. And I love sharing the story. Like, my Garmin watch became my best friend. After months of endurance training, I started receiving more information and more reports about my physical fitness and my performance than I had on my business. Not that we didn't have KPIs and we didn't have reports, but it was definitely an amateur collection of reporting processes and KPI tracking. So I said, hey, if I'm going to get these incredibly beautiful and meaningful charts on my mileage, heart rate, blood pressure, calories in, calories out, altitude, et cetera, and how that trends over time, I want that same sort of trending information and goal setting and actual against goal for my business. So I met with every single one of my department heads at the time, and we jointly came up with a set of KPIs that we were going to measure and track at a newly instituted operational review meeting, which we had at the beginning of every single month, for the previous month and quarter. And all of a sudden, guess what? Performance across the board took about 2 or 3 quarters. Every indicator started going, up and to the right and in the right direction, because no leader wanted to come to one of these new operational review meetings with their numbers going in the wrong direction. So we got a much better pulse on how everybody was performing and how the various departments were performing. And there was a little bit of like internal competition that ensued because, everybody wanted to have, better numbers. And if the numbers weren't going in the right direction, they knew that they were expected to come in with a remediation plan on what they were going to do to get those numbers better.
Yeah, perfect. I love that. And so, was there something that particularly inspired you to go out there and hit the road? Was it was it David Goggins or one of those sort of people that you saw? I want to go do that.
No, this is actually before Goggins.
All right.
What inspired me was actually my family. So I like to start off a lot of my presentations with my parents and my grandparents. They had it all: high blood pressure, diabetes, strokes, cancer, you name it, they had it. And everything that I just mentioned is hereditary. That means I've got bad genes. So I said to myself that if and when these things hit me, I want to be in the best shape possible to fight them. Right. And I chose triathlon as my first tool to utilize to get into better shape. And then triathlon led to ultra marathons, and then ultra marathons led to mountaineering. And now I'm just addicted to all of the above.
All right. So the takeaway there is do triathlons. Sounds like that's the easy choice.
that is the easy choice, and it doesn't have to be Ironman. People right now, Ironman has become synonymous with triathlon. That's the longest. Well, that's actually longer, but it's a very, very long race. It's 140.6 miles total. But there's much shorter triathlons which are just as rewarding, just as much fun, and the sense of accomplishment is just as great when you cross the finish line after an hour and a half race versus a 17-hour race.
Well, we're both men of a certain age, so we all have. I know a number of my friends who are who are entertaining those sort of ideas. I did 15 years of martial arts, and my knees are absolutely cooked. So, and I'm 6'3" and 250 pounds, so I am not built for endurance.
Understood.
Although I probably, if I did take up running, I'd be probably a lot lighter. Anyway, so when you sit down with the founder, they've got their ideas, they want to go to a certain spot, they recognize the value of bringing you in. Where are the inflection points that you see in the organization that shows you that this business has really got a chance of significantly increasing their valuation and exiting successfully?
Sure. So it definitely goes back to the recurring revenue comment. So you got to you need to have an understanding that there either is or that there will be a great degree of recurring revenue. And you also, what I like to do is take a look at the market. Is there room for continued growth? Because an acquirer is going to look at that, right? Sure. Unless you get it super lucky, and not that we were taken out strictly because of competition, but most acquirers will look at the runway that they're going to have with the company that they're looking to acquire. And if you already have 98% market share and you have no pipeline of R&D for new products, you're kind of at the end of your rope, right? And you're going to get, dinged on valuation, because there still may be several years of great cash flow and profitability, which somebody will buy, but you're not going to get maximum valuation for that. So you need to make sure that there's, something left for the acquirer in the market that you serve, or that you can readily hop into adjacent markets once you're part of a bigger organization.
Yeah, that's great. And so just as we wrap up here, I wanted to get your final thoughts on how does a business, excuse me, I'll just take a sip of water.
I'll do the same.
So as we wrap up here, I want to make sure that everybody understands what they need to be looking at. They need to be looking at that recurring revenue piece. They need to make sure they're measuring with numbers. Is there anything we haven't talked about today that you think is useful for the people in your target customer range, people who are listening, who go, you know what, I want to exit in the future? Is there anything we've missed from talking about?
I mean, the one thing I think which is really important, which helps a lot, is like a little bit of sizzle, right? So what is that, special sauce that your company has, either in its people, in its market, in its technology, that isn't available someplace else, and that would be really hard for a competitor to build, right? The investment banking firm I worked with called it the moat, right? So how big is this moat around your castle, which is going to prevent somebody else from coming into your castle? So there needs to be a certain sizzle that prevents you from being categorized as something which is a commodity, right? So because commodities, again, don't get maximum valuation. So challenge whoever's in R&D or in charge of new product development, whether it's a service or a physical product, create some sizzle and differentiation to stand out.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much for coming on the show today, Stephen. I really appreciate it. So I'll make sure your book, your website, and how people can engage with you as part of the show notes. Once again, thanks very much for coming on the show today. Appreciate it. Bye for now.
Thank you, Matthew, for having me. I enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, mate. Bye-bye.